Naomi Ellis stood silently near Gate 17, a first-class boarding pass in hand, watching travelers stream onto the Horizon Jetline's aircraft bound for Crescent City. No one recognized her, not the gate agents scanning barcodes, nor the flight crew offering smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Today, Naomi wasn't the CEO of Horizon Jetlines. She was simply another passenger, one conducting a blind audit of her airline's customer experience. What she didn't anticipate, however, was being on the receiving end of the very prejudice she had spent her career working to eliminate. The boarding process moved quickly until Naomi stepped forward and extended her ticket to the gate agent, a young man with thinning hair, a tired smile, and a name tag that read, Caleb. "First class?" Caleb asked, his brow rising slightly as he glanced from her ticket to her face. His eyes flickered over her dark skin, her short natural curls, and her elegant navy-wrap dress. "Are you sure you're at the right gate, ma'am?" Naomi offered a composed smile, her frustration tucked beneath years of practice. "Yes, I'm certain." Caleb examined her ticket again, this time with a scrutiny far more deliberate than the casual glances he'd given the white passengers before her. "It looks fine, but could I see some ID, please?" She reached calmly into her bag and retrieved her driver's license. As she handed it to him, she noted, without surprise, that none of the 5 passengers ahead of her had been asked to show identification. His eyes scanned the card. "Naomi Ellis," he murmured, then paused, expression shifting ever so slightly. "As in?" "Yes," she said, keeping her voice measured. "Like the CEO?" She offered a half-smile. "It's not an uncommon name." Caleb blinked, suddenly flustered. "Right. Of course. Enjoy your flight, Miss Ellis." Naomi nodded politely and walked down the jet bridge, mentally noting the first entry in her audit. It wasn't the first time she'd encountered unconscious bias while traveling, but this time it cut deeper. This was her airline, the company she had rebuilt from the ground up over the last 5 years. At 43, Naomi had become a trailblazer in an industry long dominated by white male executives. The daughter of Haitian immigrants, she'd started her career as a flight attendant, earned her MBA through night classes, and climbed the ranks through sheer persistence and exceptional performance. When Horizon Jetlines board appointed her CEO, industry analysts had raised eyebrows. But 5 years later, Horizon was thriving, now the 5th largest carrier in the country, with record profits and some of the highest customer satisfaction scores in the sector. Naomi's leadership was no longer just admired, it was studied. But this audit wasn't about spreadsheets or operational efficiency. It was about people. It was about whether the company lived up to its values, especially when leadership wasn't watching. Settling into seat 2A, Naomi placed her leather tote beneath the seat in front of her. She observed quietly as other first-class passengers boarded. Coats were collected, champagne offered, and newspapers delivered. But when the flight attendant serving her side, a woman in her mid-50s with tightly styled blonde hair and a name tag that read Ruth, reached Naomi's row, she kept walking. "Excuse me," Naomi said, her voice polite but firm. "Could I get a glass of water, please?" Ruth stopped, her expression professional but frosty. "Once we're in the air, of course." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "The other passengers are receiving pre-flight drinks. That service is reserved for first-class guests," Ruth replied curtly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for departure." Naomi's pulse picked up. "I am seated in first class. Seat 2A. Ruth frowned and pulled out her seating chart. "There must be some mistake. May I see your boarding pass?" Naomi handed it over calmly and watched Ruth's eyes dart across the paper. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This appears to be in order," Ruth said, clearly displeased. "I'll bring your water shortly." The man seated beside Naomi in 2B, a silver-haired businessman with an expensive watch and a look of quiet entitlement, had been watching the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. "First time in first class?" he asked, tone light but patronizing. "No," Naomi said with grace. "I travel often." The man gave a small, skeptical nod. "Just seemed like you weren't quite sure how things work up here. I'm Douglas Wren, by the way. Headed to the Global Tech Summit?" "Naomi Ellis," she replied. "And no, I have business meetings." Recognition dawned on Douglas's face. "Ellis? Not the Naomi Ellis?" Before he could finish, Ruth returned and placed a plastic cup of water on Naomi's tray. Not a glass tumbler like the others, just a small, flimsy cup without ice. "Here you are," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Thank you, Ruth," Naomi said, deliberately using her name. Would it be possible to get a hot towel like the others received? "We're actually out of hot towels," Ruth replied sharply. "Please fasten your seatbelt. We're preparing for departure." As Ruth moved away, Douglas leaned in again, this time visibly intrigued. "Are you really the CEO of Horizon?" "I am," Naomi said quietly, not looking up from her water. "But I'd appreciate it if we kept that between us." Douglas gave a low whistle. "They have no idea, do they?" "No," she replied, "and I prefer it that way." "This is an unannounced service evaluation." Douglas shook his head. "Well, looks like some of your crew might be failing that evaluation. Spectacularly." Naomi didn't reply. Instead, she gazed out the window as the plane began taxiing toward the runway. The sky opened wide beyond the clouds, and so did the reckoning. At cruising altitude, the cabin crew began meal service. From her seat, Naomi Ellis observed the clear difference in treatment. On the left side of the first-class cabin, the male flight attendant, courteous and cheerful, engaged with passengers, ensuring their comfort with attentive charm. But on Naomi's side, Ruth remained rigid and impersonal, her demeanor coldest when interacting with Naomi. When it came time for dinner orders, Ruth bypassed protocol. Rather than starting from the window seat outward as standard procedure dictated, she turned first to Douglas Wren, seated in 2B beside Naomi. "Mr. Wren, would you prefer the braised short rib or the herb-roasted salmon this evening?" "The short rib sounds great," Douglas said with a smile. Ruth nodded, seeming pleased with his selection. Then she turned to Naomi, her tone notably cooler. "And for you, the salmon or the vegetarian option?" Naomi raised her eyebrows. "I wasn't offered the short rib." "We're running low," Ruth responded shortly. "The salmon is excellent." "I'd like the short rib, please," Naomi said, her voice calm but firm. Ruth pursed her lips. "Let me see what's left," she muttered, then disappeared into the galley. Several minutes later, she returned with 2 meal trays. With practiced grace, she set Douglas's tray down in front of him. "Your short rib, Mr. Wren." Then she turned to Naomi and all but dropped her tray onto the table. "Salmon," she said flatly. "We were out of the beef." Naomi peeled back the foil lid. The overcooked salmon sat limp on a bed of soggy vegetables, nothing like the polished presentation featured in Horizon's own service training materials. Silently, she snapped a photo and saved it with the others she'd taken that day, each one building a file that was growing by the hour. After the meal, Naomi excused herself to the lavatory. When she returned, she caught sight of Ruth and the younger flight attendant, Maya, speaking in low voices, occasionally casting glances in her direction. Their whispering halted abruptly when they saw her approach, but Naomi had heard enough. "Me! Upgrade passenger and doesn't belong." For the remainder of the flight, the difference in service became even more blatant. Ruth checked on Douglas multiple times, refreshing his drink without being asked. Naomi, however, was left entirely alone. Even when she pressed the call button to request coffee, no one responded. 15 minutes passed. Eventually, Maya walked by, and Naomi caught her attention. "I think your call button might not be working," Maya said, avoiding eye contact. "What can I get you?" "Just black coffee, please," Naomi said evenly. "I'll have to check if we've brewed any," Maya mumbled, vanishing again. While she waited, Naomi opened her laptop and began typing detailed notes about the incidents, the unequal service, the dismissive tone, the lack of basic professionalism. Douglas leaned over again, clearly unsettled. "This is unreal," he said in a low voice. "I've never seen someone be treated so differently, so obviously." Naomi looked up, her expression unreadable. "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "I'm going to finish what I came to do," she replied. "Then I'll deal with it." "If you don't mind my saying so," Douglas murmured, "your restraint is impressive. I would have made a scene." Naomi gave him a knowing smile. "When you're a black woman in leadership, scenes rarely work in your favor." The captain soon made the announcement for final descent. Flight attendants moved through the cabin collecting trash and securing items. Ruth approached Douglas, took his empty glass with a polite smile, then reached for Naomi's half-full cup of coffee without a word. "I'm still drinking that," Naomi said, keeping her tone professional. "We're preparing for landing," Ruth replied curtly. "All beverages need to be collected." "The gentleman across the aisle still has his scotch," Naomi pointed out. Ruth hesitated, shot a glance at the man, then huffed and walked over to retrieve his drink as well. As Ruth passed Maya on the way back to the galley, Naomi caught a quiet mutter. Something about difficult passengers. She took a slow breath, steadying herself. The plane touched down smoothly at Crescent City International, tacking toward the gate. Once the aircraft came to a stop and the cabin doors opened, first-class passengers began to gather their belongings and disembark. Naomi remained seated. When the cabin had cleared, she stood, straightened her jacket, and approached the cockpit, where the flight's captain and co-pilot were reviewing flight data. "Excuse me, Captain." "Holden," she said, reading the name stitched into his uniform. He turned, smiling automatically, then froze when he recognized her. "Miss Ellis," he stammered. "We didn't know you were on board." "That was the point," she replied calmly. "This was a service audit. I'd like the full cabin crew to remain on board for a few moments. We need to talk." His demeanor shifted instantly. "Of course, Miss Ellis. Right away." He picked up the intercom. "All flight crew, please report to the forward galley." Within minutes, the 4 attendants arrived, confusion written across their faces, until they saw Naomi standing beside the captain. Ruth's complexion drained of color. "For those who don't recognize me," Naomi began, her voice calm but firm, "I'm Naomi Ellis, CEO of Horizon Jetlines." She paused, letting the words settle. "Today, I experienced what far too many of our passengers face every day: biased treatment based on appearance." She outlined the chain of events, beginning with Caleb, the gate agent who'd questioned her ticket, and continuing through Ruth's dismissive service and the overheard comments between her and Maya. Ruth's eyes narrowed, defensive heat rising in her voice. "With all due respect, Miss Ellis, I treated you just like any other passenger. If you felt—" "I don't feel the service was lacking," Naomi interrupted, her tone sharp but controlled. "I documented it, objectively. Inconsistently applied standards, missed protocols, disparities in service based on perceived class and race." She turned to Maya, whose posture had wilted under the weight of guilt. "Maya," Naomi said, gentler now, "I overheard your conversation with Ruth. You said I didn't belong in first class. Would you care to explain that comment?" Maya looked down at her shoes. I'm sorry, Miss Ellis. There's no excuse." "No," Naomi agreed, "there isn't." "In 2023, Naomi Ellis said firmly, looking each crew member in the eye, "not on my airline. Not in a company that prides itself on inclusion and dignity for every single person." She turned toward Captain Holden and First Officer Lynn. "You'll both be submitting full incident reports before leaving the aircraft today." Then her gaze returned to the cabin crew. "As for the in-flight team, effective immediately, Ruth and Maya, you are suspended, pending a full internal investigation." Her tone sharpened. When we invest in diversity and sensitivity training, it is not a formality. It is a standard. And when that standard is ignored, there are real consequences. Ruth's face flushed red. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice rising. "You're suspending us over one flight?" "I said suspended, not fired," Naomi replied, unwavering. "Although your reaction is telling. This isn't just about one flight, Ruth. It's about a behavior pattern, one that has no place in this company." She turned her attention to the remaining two attendants. "Derek, Leah, you'll also be interviewed. If either of you witnessed biased or unequal service and didn't report it, there will be consequences for that as well." Derek, the same attendant who had served the opposite side of first class with professionalism and warmth, took a breath and stepped forward. "Miss Ellis," he said, "I did notice some inconsistencies in how passengers were treated. I didn't realize the full extent at the time, but I should have spoken up. I'm sorry." Naomi nodded slowly. "Accountability starts with awareness." "Thank you, Derek." She looked around at the crew once more. "I built this airline on two foundational values: exceptional service and equal respect. Today, both were compromised. This flight, Flight 2941, will become a case study in our training. The results of this review will be shared company-wide. We can do better. We must do better." With that, she picked up her bag, her phone already vibrating with calls and messages from her leadership team. She stepped off the aircraft and walked through the bustling terminal of Crescent City International, reflecting on what had just unfolded. The discrimination she'd faced wasn't rare. What was rare was her ability to confront it in real time and with real authority. Most passengers didn't have that chance. They left their flights frustrated and unseen. But Naomi could do more, and she would. In the days following what came to be known internally as Flight 2941, Horizon Jet Lines felt the aftershocks. Naomi called an emergency leadership summit, bringing together her executive team in Horizon's sleek headquarters overlooking the Crescent Bay. The space, full of glass and light, echoed with a tension that was both serious and overdue. "I want to be absolutely clear," Naomi began, standing at the head of the long oak conference table. "What happened wasn't just a customer service failure. It was a violation of our core principles." Her chief operating officer, Ethan Lynn, gave a slow nod. "The initial reports from HR are troubling. Disturbing, but not entirely surprising," added Brenda Thomas, Vice President of Human Resources. "Our anonymous surveys have flagged resistance to diversity initiatives, particularly among long-tenured staff." Naomi folded her arms. "Then this is our moment, a turning point. I don't want Band-Aid solutions or hollow PR statements. I want structural, measurable change." Over the next 3 hours, the team dissected the incident and its implications. They pored over hiring practices, training programs, supervisory accountability, and feedback mechanisms. By the time the meeting ended, a sweeping reform plan was on the table, one that would touch every corner of Horizon Jet Lines. Meanwhile, not everyone was processing the fallout with the same clarity. Back in a quiet suburban cafe, Ruth sat across from her longtime friend and fellow veteran attendant Valerie, retelling her version of events over a bitter espresso. "I've given this airline 23 years, Ruth fumed. "And now I'm the villain because I didn't bow and scrape to a woman on a power trip." Valerie raised an eyebrow. "She's the CEO, Ruth. From what I heard, the difference in service was pretty obvious." "She came on board undercover, hoping to catch us slipping," Ruth insisted. "She wants to push her agenda." Valerie tilted her head. "What agenda is that?" Ruth leaned in and lowered her voice. "You know, all this inclusion stuff. The Horizon I joined used to be about merit. Now it's just about filling quotas." Valerie's face hardened. The horizon you joined nearly went under before Naomi took over. And I remember when we couldn't even get assigned international routes because they said they were too demanding for women. That wasn't merit, Ruth. That was discrimination. That was different, Ruth said quietly. Was it? Or is it just easier to recognize injustice when it's happening to you? Across town, Maya sat in her small apartment, alone, wrestling with everything that had happened. Unlike Ruth, she hadn't reached out to colleagues to defend herself. Instead, she had been thinking, deeply and uncomfortably. Finally, she picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. Her mother answered after 2 rings. "Hey, baby," her mom said, voice warm. "You okay?" "No," Maya admitted. "I really messed up." Her voice cracked. "I was part of something ugly, and I didn't even realize it. I just followed Ruth's lead without stopping to think." There was a long silence on the line. Then her mother spoke gently. "You know what your grandma used to say? Water takes the shape of whatever holds it. You let someone else's prejudice shape your actions." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I just don't know how to fix it." "You start by owning it," her mom replied. "And then you make sure it never happens again." "You let Ruth's prejudice shape your actions," Maya's mother said gently over the phone. "And that's something you've got to sit with, honey." "I know," Maya admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And now I might lose my job. A job I actually love." "Maybe you will," her mother replied calmly. "But either way, you've got some soul-searching to do. This isn't just about holding on to your paycheck. It's about becoming the woman I raised you to be." Back at Horizon Jetline's headquarters in Crescent City, Naomi Ellis sat at her desk reviewing the preliminary findings from the HR investigation. She scrolled through the report on her tablet, her expression growing more serious with each line. "So Ruth has a pattern of passenger complaints," Naomi said, her tone clipped. 7 in the past year alone, confirmed Brenda Thomas, the VP of Human Resources. At the time, most were dismissed as typical traveler grumbling, but seen together, there's a clear pattern. All complaints came from passengers of color, all referencing subtle but consistent discriminatory treatment. Naomi frowned. And no one connected the dots? Her direct supervisor, Robert Myers, apparently didn't think they were serious enough to escalate. Naomi's voice tightened. "He's going on the list, too." She swiped to the next profile. "What about Maya?" Brenda sighed. "She's newer. Excellent scores in training, no prior complaints. She was paired with Ruth for mentorship and premium cabin service." Naomi sat back. So Ruth wasn't just acting alone. She was passing along her bias to the next generation. This is exactly how toxic cultures persist. Brenda nodded. "There is a silver lining, though. Since word of the incident leaked, we've seen an outpouring of response from the wider team. Dozens of employees have come forward to share stories, things they've witnessed or endured themselves." Naomi's expression softened. "That's a start. It's more than that," Brenda said. "They're seeing real consequences for actions that used to be ignored. It's empowering people to speak up." 3 days after the incident, Douglas Wren sat across from his colleague Sophia Lynn at a bright and bustling bistro in downtown Crescent City. Their plates had barely been touched. Douglas was too busy retelling the events of the flight. "I still can't get over it," he said, shaking his head. "The CEO of the airline, Naomi Ellis, treated like she didn't belong on her own flight." Sophia leaned in. "Was it really that bad?" Douglas nodded. "It was uncomfortable just to witness. The attendant practically tossed her food down while I got royal treatment." Naomi didn't say a word, just calmly took notes. And then, when the flight landed, bam! She revealed who she was and suspended the whole team. Sophia let out a low whistle. Good for her. Not enough executives take time to experience their own company from the customer's side, especially when that experience includes bias. It made me think, Douglas admitted. How many times I've seen stuff like this and stayed quiet. I noticed the way she was treated, but I didn't speak up until I knew she was the CEO. That's called being a bystander, Sophia said, and that's exactly how inequality survives. You're right, Douglas said quietly. I should have spoken up. I'm actually thinking of writing to Horizon, not to complain, but to commend Naomi's response. It was a leadership masterclass. Sophia smiled. You should. And next time, maybe you won't wait to speak up. While Douglas and Sophia reflected over lunch, Naomi was preparing for a different kind of moment, her address to the entire company. Her door creaked open as Ethan Lynn, her COO, stepped inside. Got a minute? He asked. For you? Always, Naomi replied, gesturing to the chair across from her. Ethan sat, his expression thoughtful. We've been so focused on policy, fallout, and next steps, but I realize there's one thing we haven't talked about. What's that? You, Ethan said gently. How you are doing? Naomi paused. You've been in CEO mode since this started, he continued. But this wasn't just an incident. It was personal. It was racial profiling, and it happened to you. Her polished corporate demeanor softened. She turned her gaze toward the skyline through her office window. The truth, she said finally. It hurt. It always does. She took a breath. I've spent my whole career proving I belong in rooms where people who look like me are rarely seen. And just when I think I've reached a point where I don't have to fight for that anymore, something like this reminds me. To some people, I'll always be an outsider. Ethan nodded. As an Asian American executive himself, he understood all too well. What keeps me up at night, Naomi continued, is thinking about the passengers who go through this every day, the ones without power or platform. They just swallow it and move on. And that, Ethan said, is why your response matters. You're not just standing up for yourself. You're standing up for them. Naomi nodded. That's the plan. Ethan offered a small smile. Doesn't make it hurt less, though. No, she said, but it gives the pain a purpose. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. It was time. Ready to change a few hearts and minds? Ethan asked, rising. As ready as I'll ever be, Naomi replied, following him to the conference room. At precisely 3 p.m. Pacific Time, employees across Horizon jet lines tuned in from airport lounges, call centers, maintenance hangars, and corporate offices. Curiosity mixed with tension. Everyone knew what the address was about. Naomi appeared on screens across the country, calm, composed, and resolute. Good afternoon, Horizon family, she began. By now, many of you have heard about what happened on Flight 29401. Today, I want to speak to you directly, not just about what occurred, but what it means and where we go from here. She recounted the events with clarity, without naming names, but making the inequities unmistakably clear. The room she stood in was silent, but across the country, jaws clenched. Some heads bowed. Others nodded in recognition. I experienced what far too many of our passengers go through, Naomi Ellis said, her voice unwavering as it streamed across the screens of Horizon Jet Line's nationwide workforce. Service that shifts depending on the color of your skin. That is unacceptable, especially in a company that claims diversity and inclusion as core to its identity and success. From airport lounges to crew centers, employees watched her address with a mix of emotion. In the Atlantic City Crew Lounge, a small group of flight attendants sat huddled around a screen. Some nodded in quiet agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably. She's making a big deal out of nothing, one murmured. Is she, though? A colleague whispered back. Because I've seen exactly what she's describing, too many times. In the Chicago Operations Center, dispatchers and flight managers gathered in clusters, taking notes as Naomi outlined the company's immediate next steps. Effective today, she continued, we're expanding our anonymous passenger feedback system to include clear questions about fairness and equitable service. She clicked through slides showing data dashboards and new reporting protocols. We're launching a peer reporting structure so employees can safely share concerns about biased behavior. And we're revamping our diversity training, not just to raise awareness, but to drive meaningful action. She leaned slightly toward the camera, her expression both firm and compassionate. But policy alone isn't enough. This has to be a cultural reset, one that begins with all of us admitting a simple truth. Bias exists. It exists in our industry, in our communities, and yes, in our company. At Crescent City International, gate agents and customer service staff watched between helping passengers. Among them was Caleb, the agent who had questioned Naomi's boarding pass just days earlier. He froze as her words echoed through the staff area. A first-class ticket questioned, not because of a policy, but because someone didn't expect someone like me to hold that seat. Caleb stared at the floor. "Oh my God," he muttered under his breath. That was her. That was the CEO. His supervisor, Monica, turned slowly. "Something you want to tell me, Caleb?" He swallowed hard. I think I was the one she was talking about. I questioned her ticket because I didn't think she looked like your idea of a first-class passenger." Monica finished for him, her tone even. Caleb nodded, cheeks flushed. Monica folded her arms. "We'll be having a longer conversation after this broadcast." Back on the Companywide stream, Naomi addressed another common refrain. Some of you might be thinking, "I don't see color," or "I treat everyone the same." But the data tells a different story. She displayed a chart comparing customer satisfaction across racial demographics. The disparities were sharp, consistent, and undeniable. "This isn't about blaming individuals," she continued. "It's about collective responsibility. Because good intentions don't matter if the outcomes continue to be unequal." Across town, Ruth sat in her small kitchen, laptop open, the broadcast playing in front of her. Her arms were crossed, jaw clenched. "This is character assassination," she muttered. "She's turning me into some kind of villain, without even saying my name." The phone rang. The caller ID flashed her union rep's name. She answered with a sigh. "Have you seen the CEO's address?" the rep asked. "I'm watching it now," Ruth replied bitterly. "Quite the performance." "This is serious," the rep said flatly. "I've reviewed the internal findings. They've got multiple statements, witnesses, even a report from the passenger in 2B. "They're going to fire me over one bad flight?" Ruth snapped. "It wasn't just one, Ruth," the rep said quietly. "They've pulled your record. There's a pattern, subtle, but consistent. You need to understand what's at stake. If you want any chance of staying with the company, you're going to have to acknowledge that." The weight of it hit her. For the first time, Ruth felt something shift. Not just anger, but doubt. Maybe, just maybe, the problem wasn't Naomi Ellis. Maybe it was her. In contrast, Maya was watching the same broadcast in her apartment with a very different emotion swirling in her chest. Guilt and a growing resolve. She had spent the last 3 days examining every interaction, every choice, every word exchanged during the flight. And none of it lined up with the kind of person she thought she was. Her phone rang as the broadcast wrapped up. It was Brenda Thomas from HR. "Hello, Maya. I'm calling to schedule your formal interview about the incident on Flight 2941. "Yes, of course," Maya replied. Her voice was calm, but her stomach fluttered with nerves. "Can you come in tomorrow at 10 a.m.? "That works." Brenda's voice softened. "Maya, this conversation will go better if you come prepared. Not just to explain what happened, but to reflect on why it happened, and how you plan to grow from it." "I understand," Maya said. "I've been thinking a lot about that." "Good," Brenda replied. "Because while this is serious, It's also an opportunity for learning, for change. After hanging up, Maya turned back to the laptop screen where Naomi was finishing her address. "I want to be clear about one thing," Naomi said, her voice gentle now, but still resolute. "This incident, painful as it was, has only strengthened my resolve." She looked straight into the camera, eyes shining with conviction. Horizon Jetlines will be a company where every passenger, every employee, every partner is treated with equal dignity, not because it's legally required or good PR, but because it's the right thing to do, and because it's good business. Because fairness in business isn't optional, Naomi Ellis said, locking eyes with the camera. If you're watching this and thinking this initiative doesn't apply to you, or that this doesn't impact your role, I need you to understand something. It does. Every interaction matters. Every passenger deserves our best. And we will accept nothing less from ourselves or one another. As her broadcast concluded, a quiet wave of reflection rolled across Horizon Jetlines. Some employees felt defensive. Others felt affirmed. But nearly everyone felt the weight of the moment. Something had shifted, and Horizon would never quite be the same. In the executive suite at Horizon headquarters, Naomi and her leadership team were deep into implementation. Change was no longer a promise. It was a process. "This went live this morning," Ethan Lynn said during the daily briefing, gesturing to a dashboard displayed on the conference room screen. The updated customer feedback system now includes questions specifically focused on fairness, inclusivity, and equitable treatment. Naomi reviewed the early results on her tablet. "And what are we seeing?" "A noticeable increase," Ethan replied, "both in praise and in concerns, especially about bias. It's like passengers suddenly believe we care about their experiences in a new way." Brenda Thomas nodded. "We're seeing the same thing internally." The new employee reporting tool logged 37 reports in its first week. 37, Naomi repeated. "Is that a sign that things are worse than we thought, or that people finally feel safe reporting them?" "Probably both," Brenda said, "but I see it as a win. We can't fix what we never hear about." Naomi turned to the next item on her agenda. "And the crew from Flight 2941? "The investigation is complete," Brenda said. "We're recommending termination for Ruth and her supervisor, Robert Myers, for bearing previous complaints." Naomi nodded, not with satisfaction, but resolve. "And Maya?" she asked. 6-month probation," Brenda answered. "Mandatory participation in intensive bias training, plus mentoring and community service. She's accepted the terms." "And the flight deck crew?" "Written warnings," Ethan added. "They weren't directly involved, but they failed to uphold Horizon service standards across the cabin." Naomi took a deep breath. "Let's move forward with the recommendations." Meanwhile, at Denver International, a heated discussion was underway in the flight attendant break room. "I heard Ruth suing the company," said Bryce, a young flight attendant just a year into the job. "On what grounds?" asked Tanisha, a veteran known for her no-nonsense attitude. "They've got a whole file on her. She had years of complaints." "She says the CEO's making an example of her," Bryce replied, "that Naomi's pushing some kind of agenda." Tanisha raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, an agenda of expecting us to treat all passengers with respect. Shocking, I know." "I'm not saying I agree with her," Bryce said quickly. "Just telling you what she said." Tanisha folded her arms. "It's always the ones who say I don't see color who act like they don't have a problem." Across the room, Helena, another flight attendant, joined the conversation. "What about the new girl, Maya? Is she getting canned too?" "Probation," Tanisha said. "She took ownership. She's working on a plan to make it right." "Good," Helena nodded. "We all mess up. What matters is what you do next." As the group gathered their bags for the next flight, Tanisha paused. "You know what really stuck with me? That guy in 2B, the tech exec. He sent a letter to corporate backing up everything Naomi reported. A white male passenger, Alina said, nodding. Nothing to gain by speaking up, but he did anyway. That's not allyship, Tanisha corrected. That's leadership, and we need more of it, up there and down here. In Crescent City, Maya sat in a small conference room facing Brenda Thomas and a facilitator from the company's newly formed bias response team. Thank you for your honesty during this process, Brenda began. Your willingness to reflect on your actions has been noted and appreciated. Maya gave a slow nod, her voice steady. I want to be clear. I'm not asking for credit. I failed as a flight attendant and as a decent human being. That awareness matters, said the facilitator, Dr. Raymond Carter. But awareness alone isn't enough. Tell us what you plan to do next. Maya opened a folder with a written proposal. I've committed to 3 actions, she began. First, I'll complete the full bias training program, not just because it's mandatory, but because I need to unlearn some things. Second, I've arranged to volunteer weekly with a local organization that mentors youth of color interested in aviation. And third, when my probation ends, I'd like to join the peer education team to help ensure others don't make the same mistakes I did. Brenda and Dr. Carter exchanged a look, impressed. That's a strong plan, Brenda said, especially your intent to contribute back to the culture. Maya nodded. Naomi's address made me realize something. This wasn't just one mistake. It was a reflection of a broken system. And I don't want to be part of the problem anymore. I want to be part of the change. And third, Maya continued, I'm requesting to join the peer education team after my probation ends so I can share what I've learned with my colleagues. Brenda Thomas and Dr. Raymond Carter exchanged a glance, one of genuine appreciation. That's a well-rounded plan, Brenda said, especially your focus on not just repairing personal harm, but helping reshape our culture. Maya took a quiet breath, then added, watching Miss Ellis's address. It hit me that this isn't just about one flight or one executive's experience. It's about a system that allows some passengers to be treated differently, just because of how they look. Exactly, Dr. Carter nodded. And changing culture requires both personal reflection and collective effort. Maya's voice grew more certain. I want to be part of that change. I know trust isn't something I can ask for. I have to earn it back, and I'm willing to do the work. As she walked out of the room, her probation terms finalized, Maya felt a strange but powerful mix of sorrow and hope. The incident had forced her to confront truths she'd ignored for too long, but it had also opened the door to becoming someone new, someone who stood beside the marginalized, not against them. 2 weeks after Flight 2941, Naomi Ellis was in her office reviewing the latest data from Horizon's customer feedback systems when her assistant peeked in. Miss Ellis, there's someone here to see you. No appointment, but he says it's important. Naomi looked up, curious. Douglas Wren, her assistant added. A smile flickered across her face. Send him in. Douglas entered, a little more tentative than the confident man who had once questioned her presence in first class. Mr. Wren, Naomi said warmly, standing to shake his hand. What a surprise. Thank you for seeing me without notice, Douglas said, taking the seat across from her. I wanted to deliver this personally. He handed over an envelope. Inside was a check made out to the Horizon Flight Foundation, the Airline Scholarship Fund for underrepresented youth pursuing careers in aviation. The amount, $50,000. Naomi blinked. Mr. Wren, this is incredibly generous. It's the least I could do, Douglas replied. After what I saw on that flight and how you responded, I felt like I had to contribute, not just with words, but with action. Naomi leaned forward. May I ask, what moved you to this specific gesture? Douglas shifted in his chair, clearly choosing his words with care. Honestly, that flight was a wake-up call. I've always thought of myself as progressive. Fair. But watching how you were treated and realizing how often I've witnessed similar things without saying a word, it made me confront some things. He paused, then added, After your address went public, I had our own diversity officer review our corporate policies. Turns out we had a lot of room to improve. This donation is part of our broader commitment to making things right, not just in our company, but in who we partner with. Naomi nodded, deeply moved. Thank you for sharing that. You're proof that one experience, handled with courage, can spark ripple effects far beyond its origin. That's what I hoped, Douglas said. And I wanted to thank you personally for turning something painful into a teaching moment, not just for your team, but for people like me. After he left, Naomi sat quietly for a moment, holding the envelope in her hands. What had started as a quiet service audit had evolved into something much larger, a mirror for an entire industry. Her phone buzzed. Ethan Lynn was calling from the operations center. We've got the first full month of data from the new feedback systems, he said. You're going to want to see this. I'm on my way, Naomi replied, grabbing her tablet. At Horizon's Global Operations Hub, a wall of real-time dashboards lit up with stats on flight status, on-time performance, customer ratings, and more. Ethan stood beside a large screen showing one particular graph. Customer satisfaction by demographic group. This is from the past 30 days, he said. Look at the trend line. Naomi studied the numbers. While overall satisfaction remained high, the gap between white passengers and passengers of color had noticeably narrowed. It's not a huge shift, Ethan cautioned, but it's statistically significant. The closest those lines have been since we started tracking them. Naomi tapped her chin. Correlation doesn't always mean causation. This could be a fluctuation. True, Ethan said, but the timing lines up with the changes we made after Flight 2941, and the internal reporting trends match the external ones. Naomi allowed herself a rare smile. It's a start. It's more than that, Ethan said. It's proof that when we confront bias head-on, when we stop tiptoeing around it, we actually get results. Just then, Brenda Thomas entered, tablet in hand. I just came from a meeting with the Flight Attendants Union, she reported. They've agreed to support the peer reporting initiative, and they're proposing to make bias prevention training mandatory for all union members. Naomi blinked in surprise. Seriously? Brenda nodded. There was some initial resistance, but most of the reps said it's time. They want their members held to the same standard we're applying across the company. Naomi leaned back against the counter, absorbing the moment. That's big. It is, Brenda agreed. It means the culture is beginning to shift, not just from the top, but within the ranks. That's significant, Naomi Ellis said, reviewing the union's agreement. Mandatory bias prevention training for all members. That's a real milestone. There's been some pushback, Brenda Thomas admitted, especially from more senior crew who feel it implies they've been doing their jobs wrong for decades. Well, Ethan Lynn said matter-of-factly, some of them have. Naomi raised an eyebrow but didn't disagree. Even so, we need to bring them into the fold, not push them out. Change sticks better when people feel like they're part of the process, not the problem. Speaking of investment, Brenda said, I have an update on Maya. She's finished the first phase of her training and has started her volunteer work. Her mentor says she's fully committed and showing real progress. Good, Naomi nodded. And as expected, Brenda added, Ruth has filed a wrongful termination suit. Naomi sighed. Do we have a solid defense? We do, Brenda confirmed. The documentation is airtight, but she's framing it as political overreach. Let legal know, Naomi said carefully. We're not out to ruin her life. If she's willing to acknowledge the harm and show a commitment to change, I'm open to discussing a settlement that includes a path to rehabilitation. Ethan blinked. After everything. This isn't about forgiveness, Naomi replied. It's about consistency. If we say we believe people can grow, that belief has to extend even to the people who failed us. Brenda nodded slowly. I'll pass that message on. As the meeting ended and her team returned to their respective departments, Naomi sat back for a moment in her office. The last month had been one of the most challenging and defining of her leadership. She had always led with a focus on excellence and equity, but the experience on Flight 2941 had carved those values deeper into her being. It had sharpened her mission, not just to run a successful airline, but to build a company where those values were truly lived. Back at her desk, Naomi noticed a new email with the subject line, a note from a gate agent. She opened it. Miss Ellis, I've been trying to write this for weeks. I was the agent who questioned your first-class ticket. I didn't realize who you were until the broadcast. I want to sincerely apologize. Since then, I've been confronting the assumptions that led me to second-guess your presence in that seat. I realize now how bias shows up, even when we think we're just doing our jobs. Thank you for not using your power to punish me, but instead using it to turn this into something constructive. I'm committed to doing better, and I won't waste this second chance. Naomi typed a short, sincere reply. Then she leaned back in her chair and turned to the window, watching the aircraft rise and descend over Crescent City International. Each plane carried hundreds of lives, people from different backgrounds, stories, and realities. On board those flights, thousands of small interactions unfolded every day. Any one of them could uplift or harm, affirm or dismiss, heal or scar. Every one of those moments mattered. Her reflection was interrupted by a phone buzz, a news alert. She glanced down. Top 50 Most Influential Leaders in Transportation released. She scanned the subheading. Naomi Ellis ranks number 3 for her leadership in equity reform at Horizon Jetlines, up from number 12 the previous year. She allowed herself a small smile, then placed the phone face down. Recognition was nice, but it wasn't the goal. The real success lay in the shifting data, the changing attitudes, and the growing company-wide understanding that excellence and equity weren't separate ideals. They were deeply, permanently linked. The journey was far from over. Real culture change never happened overnight. But Flight 2941 had become more than an incident. It was now a reference point, a before and after, a moment the company would point back to for years to come. 6 months later, Horizon Jetlines hosted a company-wide event at its Crescent City headquarters. The auditorium was filled with employees, union leaders, industry partners, and members of the media. On stage, Naomi stood at the center of her leadership team, ready to unveil the next phase of Horizon's transformation. Welcome, she said. 6 months ago, an incident challenged us to take a hard look at who we were and who we wanted to be. Today, that challenge becomes a commitment. Behind her, a screen lit up with the new title, The Elevated Skies Initiative, a comprehensive equity program spanning training, hiring, service design, and community outreach. Naomi walked the audience through the program's pillars. Enhanced training protocols for all frontline staff and leadership. Structural reform to how service quality is measured and rewarded. New mentorship and advancement pathways for underrepresented employees. A community partnership program to build diversity in the aviation talent pipeline. But the heart of this program, Naomi said, isn't just in its structure. It's in a simple but transformative belief. True service excellence can only exist when it's extended equally to everyone. She scanned the room, eyes resting for a moment on familiar faces. In the front row sat Maya, now a contributing member of Horizon's peer education team. Just behind her was Douglas Wren, whose company had joined Horizon's Supplier Equity Network and had committed to new DEI standards in its own travel policies. Not far away was Caleb, the gate agent who had once made a snap judgment, and who now served as a mentor in Horizon's new Customer Empathy Ambassador program. And while Ruth wasn't there, Naomi had offered her an invitation. Ruth had declined, but had completed the required bias training as part of a confidential settlement. Not all stories would end neatly. Growth had to be chosen. But the door had remained open, and that mattered too. New ways to evaluate service, new career development pathways for underrepresented employees, and meaningful community partnerships to diversify the aviation talent pipeline, Naomi Ellis continued from the stage. But the true heart of this program isn't in its policies or procedures. It's in one simple, powerful truth. Excellence in service can only exist when it is extended equally to all. As Naomi spoke, her eyes moved across the audience, pausing briefly on faces that had become integral to the journey that began with Flight 29401. In the front row sat Maya, recently completing her probation and now a rising leader within the peer education team. Next to her was Douglas Wren, whose company had become a strategic partner in Horizon Jetline's corporate equity initiative, not just adjusting their travel policies, but reshaping their internal practices as well. A few rows back, Naomi spotted Caleb, the former gate agent who had once questioned her presence in first class. He now served as team lead for the Customer Experience Ambassador program, a role he had helped design to ensure no traveler was ever again made to feel like they didn't belong. Missing from the gathering was Ruth. Her legal case had quietly settled with a retirement agreement contingent on her completion of Horizon's full bias training curriculum. Naomi had extended her an invitation to attend the launch as an olive branch. Ruth had declined. It was a quiet reminder. Not every story tied itself up with a neat ending. Some healing took longer, and some choices, like growth, had to be made willingly. Many of you know this initiative began because of my personal experience, Naomi said, her voice steady. What you may not know is how deeply that moment connected me with the experiences of so many of our passengers and our team who face this kind of treatment every day. Often without the platform to speak up, often without the power to do anything about it. She paused. The weight of that truth settled over the auditorium. Today, I'm proud to announce the creation of the Elevated Voices Fund, a new grant initiative supporting organizations fighting discrimination in transportation and beyond. The room erupted in applause, especially from the employee section. And now, Naomi continued, I'd like to introduce someone who's walked a remarkable path of transformation over these last 6 months. She turned toward the wings of the stage. Maya Ramirez joined Horizon 3 years ago as a flight attendant. Today, she leads our peer education program for bias prevention. Maya stepped onto the stage, her posture nervous but determined. She stood at the podium, pausing briefly before speaking. Thank you, Miss Ellis, she began. 6 months ago, I was part of something that betrayed everything Horizon stands for, and everything I thought I believed about myself. She let the words hang there. I'm not here today as someone with all the answers. I'm here as someone committed to asking better questions. She described her journey, from the shame she felt after Flight 2941, to the mentoring she received, to the hard lessons she learned in training and through volunteer work. I've learned that good intentions are not enough, Maya said. We can mean well, while still participating in systems that produce unfair outcomes. She took a breath. That's why the Elevated Skies initiative isn't just about awareness. It's about measurable change. Change we can track. Change we can build on. The audience responded with warm, sustained applause as Maya stepped away from the podium and returned to her seat. Naomi returned to the stage once more. I want to close with a reflection on leadership, she said. There is a difference between being in charge and being a leader. Being in charge means having authority, she said. Being a leader means using that authority to create something better for everyone. She looked out at the room, filled with employees, executives, union partners, and media. Each of you, no matter your title or your tenure, has the power to be a leader. Because every interaction is a chance to reflect our commitment to excellence that doesn't discriminate, that doesn't waver based on who is on the receiving end. That holds firm to the idea that equal respect is the foundation of true excellence. A final slide appeared behind her on screen. Equity is excellence. Naomi continued, "This statement will now appear on every employee badge, in every training manual, and eventually on every aircraft we fly." The event concluded with a standing ovation. As the attendees began to file out, many made their way toward Naomi, not for photos, but for conversations. Some simply wanted to share their stories. Others wanted to express support. Some needed to ask hard questions. But every conversation, Naomi noticed, was real, candid, hopeful. The culture shift was no longer theoretical. It was underway. Later that evening, long after the applause had faded and the building had emptied, Naomi stood alone in her office. She looked at a new framed photo on her wall. It showed her boarding a Horizon Jetlines flight, a candid shot captured by the company's photographer. The crew greeting her in the picture reflected the very vision she'd worked so hard to build. Diverse, welcoming, unified. It was her first flight after Flight 2941. Next to the photo hung a simple, elegant plaque. It read, "Justice isn't what we say, it's what we do, especially when tested." Naomi smiled quietly to herself. That flight, as painful as it had been, had sparked something extraordinary. It had become a point of transformation. For her, for Horizon Jetlines, and perhaps even for an industry too long stuck in outdated systems. The framed photo hanging in Naomi Ellis's office captured a quiet but profound moment. Her first flight after Flight 2941. In the image, Naomi stood at the aircraft doorway, greeted by a smiling flight crew whose faces represented the very diversity she had long championed. Black, Latino, Asian, white, men and women, veterans and rookies. It wasn't a staged photo. There had been no announcement. Just a genuine welcome from a team that had begun to reflect the values Horizon Jetlines now boldly stood for. Beside the photograph, mounted neatly on the wall, hung a sleek silver plaque. Its inscription had become Naomi's personal mantra since that pivotal day. Justice is not just what we say. It's what we do when tested. And Flight 2941 had been exactly that. A test. It had arrived unannounced and uncomfortable, but it had revealed cracks Naomi had long suspected and confirmed the importance of everything she had been working toward. The journey of building a truly equitable company was far from over. There was still resistance, still learning to be done, still systems to correct. But Horizon Jetlines had stepped onto a new path, one that honored its past while reshaping its future. As Naomi gathered her things and prepared to leave for the evening, her phone buzzed with a message. Ethan Lynn. Latest customer satisfaction metrics just dropped. The gap's down another 15%. Real change is happening. Naomi smiled, slipping her phone into her bag. Metrics mattered. Numbers told stories. But the truest sign of transformation wasn't only in data points. It was in the conversations happening in break rooms and briefing halls. It was in the tone of new hire orientations, in the language used on flight decks and in service scripts. It was in the stack of letters and emails from passengers, many of whom had never heard of Flight 29401, but had felt the difference in how they were treated. For every headline that Flight 2941 had earned, Naomi knew there were hundreds of similar incidents that had unfolded quietly over the years, in the shadows. Now, those shadows were being lit, not to punish, but to heal, to grow, to transform. That flight had begun, with the CEO of Horizon Jetlines being treated like she didn't belong. It ended with a company realigning itself to make sure everyone did. A renewed commitment to service, one that transcended job titles, skin tones, or seat assignments. A promise that equity and excellence were not two separate paths, but one unified standard that would define Horizon moving forward. As Naomi exited the elevator and stepped into the lobby, she paused in front of a newly unveiled installation. A pair of wings, sculpted from thousands of shimmering mirror tiles, stretched across the wall. Each mirrored piece was shaped slightly differently, catching the light at unique angles. No two were the same, and yet, together, they formed a powerful whole. Beneath the sculpture, a simple inscription read, "Many perspectives, one sky." Naomi stood in quiet reflection for a long moment. It was more than an art piece. It was a message, a mission, a mirror held up to the organization they were still becoming. A company where diversity wasn't just acknowledged, but celebrated, where equity wasn't an initiative, but a foundational value, where every person who soared beneath their wings, passenger or employee, was met with the same dignity, care, and excellence. And this time, it wasn't just words.